Well, hello and welcome everybody to Conversations for Change. This is our live podcast series produced by The Innate Coach, where we explore how changes in the way we communicate can create healthier, more inclusive and connective workplaces. I'm Andrea Morrison.
And I'm Helen May, and we're really glad that you could be here today. And this is a special conversation that we're going to have, and we've got one lined up for you.
This episode is supported by York and North Yorkshire Combined Authority using funding from the Department for Work and Pensions, Get Britain Working Economic Inactivity Trailblazer. We are recording today, but if you prefer not to be recorded, please turn off your camera and mic, but you're very welcome to stay and listen.
So we're joined today by three leaders, and hopefully one more will be joining us shortly from across the region who took part in our programmes last time. So very pleased to introduce Lois Kirkland, Founding Director of Hetty and Betty in Whitby, Nicola Lyons, so Nikki, the Associate Director of People and Culture at St Michael's Hospice. We will be joined shortly by Mike Sweeting, the Human Resource Officer at Old Walk Manor, and we have Jackie Judge here today, Senior Sponsor at Network Rail. All four of them have been through one of our programmes earlier this year, and they're here today to share their experiences and also practical suggestions that they have about this year's theme.
We evaluated our year one programmes in partnership with York St John University, and one finding kept coming up above everything else. So, across more than 70 leaders, from sole traders to an organisation of 40,000 people, we found the biggest change wasn't about learning a new skill. It was about recognizing what was innate within them and shifting something fundamental from fixing to listening, and then from listening to facilitating.
So, as leaders, we build our reputation on getting these things done and sorting things out. And we found that what leaders kept discovering, including the four people that are with us today, because I see Mike's just joining us, um, that when they jumped in with the solution, it closed the conversation down. And then that meant that the other person wasn't heard or encouraged to think for themselves in their role. When another issue arose, the pattern was repeated, leaving the leader routinely problem solving in their role.
Through the programme, we encourage leaders to slow down and reflect on how well they listened. In the workplace, leaders told us that listening with greater depth and intent prompted their teams to think for themselves. Their teams brought solutions rather than problems, and leaders found that they had more time to do the role they were employed to do with more headroom and a higher level of trust in their teams.
In fact, before the programme even started, 87% of our leaders told us that one of their aspirations was to learn how to listen and also question with more curiosity. They identified listening as something they wanted to work on. So Lois, Nicola, Nikki, Mike, and Jackie were amongst those leaders. And today we're going to hear from them about their journey from fixing to listening within their organisations.
So, we will be exploring what fixing and listening means to them, what changed for them through the programme, and what they would say to any leader here today who wants to have a better conversation at work.
We'll also open it up to the audience partway through our discussion. So we invite you to put any questions in the chat or save them until the end. But first, let's meet our panel.
So, we're delighted to be joined today by Lewis, Nikki, Mike, and Jackie. So, a really warm welcome to all four of you. It's lovely to have you here. And I have a question that I want each of you to answer. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your organisation, and which programme and Conversations for Change that you joined?
So if I go first, so I'm Lois Kirtland. I am the founder and owner of Hetty and Betty. We are a multi-award winning restaurant and venue in the heart of Whitby, North Yorkshire. We are famous for the fish and chips afternoon tea. I joined the Fundamentals of Coaching program with the Innate Coach, which I'm happy to say I've thoroughly enjoyed and completed.
That's great. Thank you, Lewis. Nikki, perhaps you could go next.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nikki Lyons. I'm the Associate Director of People and Culture at North Yorkshire Hospice Care, which comprises St Michael's Hospice, Heriot Hospice, and Just Be Bereavement Support. So I lead HR there basically. So look after everything HR related for quite a large, complex charity with those three different brands and people sort of dispersed all over North Yorkshire, doing different jobs in different ways. So yeah, it keeps me very busy. And fish and chips afternoon tea sounds excellent. May have to sample that when I next come to Whitby.
Mm.
Thank you, Nikki. That was great. And just in case I missed it, which program were you part of last year?
Yeah, so I did the Coaching for Leaders program, which
Uh,
was very, very good and insightful.
Thank you. That's great. And Jackie, if you could go next.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jackie Judge. I'm a senior sponsor at Network Rail. It's a huge organisation going through a lot of change at the moment as Great British Railways comes into force as well. I did the Fundamentals of Coaching program earlier this year. And yeah, that's me.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jackie. And last but by no means least, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with the fish and chip afternoon tea thing. Actually, that's yeah. So now my name's Mike. I work at Old Manor Estates. I look after HR there. So we are a luxury hotel just on the outskirts of York. I with Lois and we joined did the Fundamentals of Coaching Award. And yeah, so my role is obviously looking after all elements of HR in a hotel. So yeah, that's me.
That's great. Thank you, Mike.
In this first part, we're going to be focusing on definitions and we're going to ask slightly different questions to kind of get different angles on the issue around listening and what the definitions of that are for our leaders here today. So let's start with Jackie. Can we start with you? So,
Yeah, sure.
Jackie, before you came on the programme, what would get in the way of your listening in the workplace?
I think normally it's when you're busy. So I think we all work in really busy environments. There's nobody who I speak to who sat there twiddling their thumbs. And I think it's that space and time that you don't seem to get. So you're rushing from one thing to another. You're always on the go, thinking of the next thing you've got to do, thinking of the next task, thinking of the next issue and problem. So it's that constant thinking that I think gets in the way of listening.
Thank you, Jackie. And in a slightly related question for Lois, I will come to you next. Before you came on the programme, how did you go about fixing as a leader? Could you kind of bring that in?
So, like Jackie, I mean, obviously, I work in hospitality. It's extremely fast paced. It is, it literally is change, 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 and it's minute by minute, second by second. And so, a lot of the problems that would arise, or a lot of the things that people would want to talk to you about, needed immediate answers. And because a lot of them are repetition, so quite often you get asked the same thing over and over again. You don't even listen to the end of the question. You're already answering before before they've even got the question out. And so and so being obviously the owner of the business as well, I am the font of all knowledge. So as people come to me for it, I'm automatically assuming, oh, I know what they've asked me, and therefore this is how I can fix it. There you go, there's your answer, off you go and do that. Rather than giving them the skills to do it themselves.
Yeah, and that's a really key point, isn't it, Lois, to this whole agenda. So let's hear from Mike next. So Mike, in your HR role in that busy hotel, so it kind of links that theme of it being fast paced and there's a pressure and lots of people are coming to you. Why would you say it's hard to resist the urge to kind of fix?
Um, well, I suppose some things do need fixing, and then it's the ability to understand what you're fixing, and then you're flipping between various hats, whether it's mentoring, whether it's therapy, whether it's coaching, um, and it's probably about trying to quieten the noise down for yourself, along with everybody else in an environment that's often really busy and relentless. Hotels, like I suppose Nikki might say, in maybe in her sector, I can't speak for everybody, but ultimately they never shut. And I think that psychological shut off of going, I've turned the close sign round or I've turned the lights off, you can mentally sort of walk away. But the challenge is that there could be problems that come at any time of day, morning, noon, night, 365 days a year. And the resist the urge to fix. I think sometimes because we're constantly changing and we're always in sort of that transitional phase where something new comes in, new technology, new legislation, some things are quite quick to have to fix, and sometimes you've got to differentiate between looking at your kind of the person that you're working with, going, well, actually, you know this, you're the expert in the field, you've been employed to do the job, and making sure we've got the time to be able to separate that, being able to work through a problem that ultimately, I think, like Lois was saying, the repetition piece was obviously quite interesting, because if you're constantly going over the same thing, maybe they're not listening, or maybe we're not understanding. So there's a bit of a balance there, isn't there? But yeah, it is difficult. It is difficult because ultimately you don't want to see people suffer. You don't want to see people go through heartache, and you want people to understand why, because sometimes when a problem's presented to you, somebody won't understand why you're taking the time to go through it with somebody. And actually what we're trying to do is help people get better.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I think what you were saying linked back to what Lois was saying about people thinking for themselves in the role and that accountability for the role that they're tasked to do. But I also heard you talking about slowing down. So I'm going to bring that question to Nikki and ask Nikki, what does listening really mean to you? So it's not just hearing the words, but perhaps deep listening. And how would you describe the difference?
So I thought about this question, and it's the temptation is, like I think all the other panel members have said, to jump in with a solution, especially when you're busy. Just jump in and fix it. But we could be missing an opportunity to a sort of help somebody develop a skill, reinforce that they have the right answer, grow as a person. But to create a sort of environment where people are accountable and step up into their role and responsibility. And it's hard to do that because you're busy and you want to just get on. That person comes to you for help and the temptation is to give them the answer and then you can move on to the next thing. But you might be missing something under the surface that's not really the problem that they brought to you was not really what the issue is. It's something else. It could be anything to do with their kind of development or their well-being or something that's going on outside of work, but they've brought a problem to you because they can't see a solution in that moment. And there might be another reason why that is. So if you can just take that extra bit of time and just not jump into a solution, but maybe just ask some more questions about, just tell me a bit more about that. Tell me a bit more about how that felt or what was going on, or, how you need to feel to move forward or something like that. Just gets under the skin of that surface level issue to maybe something else that's going on that you can then address and really help that person to move forward, but also help you as the leader and help the organization. It's kind of a win-win all round, really, if you can do that. So for me, I think that's what the difference really is. It's that space to allow them to think it through and to come up with something that might be sitting underneath that surface level. And I guess also trying to see what they're not saying, reading their body language and what are they not communicating, and trying to ask more curious questions around that, to see if you can get on under the skin, really.
Yeah, super. So I'm hearing a reoccurrent theme about slowing down, and it kind of
Yeah.
can go counterintuitive to what we might naturally do as leaders, which is rush forward, get things done. But that's slowing down, and the benefit of that I'm really hearing as a theme. Shall we move on to the next
Yeah.
part of the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I was hearing there, the richness in that slowing down and getting under the skin, that people might be coming to you with one problem, but that might not actually be the problem. That there could be something underneath that. And but when you're busy, as you've all described, that busyness and that time pressure and resource pressure, and you've just got to get it done. And there's that tendency, isn't there, to just kind of just dive in and give that solution. And it comes from a good place. But I think that was lovely what you said there, Nikki. But yeah, what are we missing when we do that? So throughout the program, and I'm going to put this question to all of you, through the program, what changed for you in terms of how well you listened, and what was the consequence of trying that out in a work setting? So if we start with we'll start with Nikki first because we ended with her, and it was such a good place to finish. So if we start with you, Nikki, first of all.
Yeah, so it's hard. That I found proper listening really hard to do. I think, like we've all said, you're super busy. There's a million and one distractions just in life and in work, and it's a real skill that I think takes time to practice and develop. And I'm definitely not an expert at it yet. I'm still very much working on it, and still find that there's often conversations where I afterwards will reflect and go, I didn't really listen to what they were properly saying to me, or I don't remember details or whatever it might be. And I think that's what's changed for me really, is me being able to notice those things and reflect on it and realize when I'm not listening. I definitely learnt from the program that I am a fixer, and I will try to give people advice and tell them what I would do. I think working for 15 years in HR just put that's just what you do. You're so used to kind of advising people, that is what you tend to default to. So it's a real shift for me to try and not do that, and give people that space that we've talked about. So yeah, I'm putting a lot of effort into trying to do that, and also trying to kind of make sure I think about, if is there times when a solution is just needed? Do I just need to fix this? And acknowledging the well-being of my team sometimes, that actually they do just need me to come in as a leader and just fix it that time. There wasn't space for that kind of coaching conversation in that moment, but maybe there would be later as a more of a reflective piece. And I do think that switching to the techniques that we learn in the Coaching for Leaders program and using them when it's appropriate with my team, I've definitely seen their confidence start to grow, and they start to come to me more with the solution, and it's just they're running it past me and saying, do you think I'm on the right lines, or have you got any feedback on what I've suggested or the advice I've given? And it's I'm starting to see that impact on them and their growth, but also on me and my capacity and time as well.
Yeah. I think that's a lovely consequence, isn't it? That you're actually now seeing it in a relatively short period of time since you've been
Yeah,
on the program. That actually your team are now more confident, they're more empowered, and they're actually coming to you with solutions rather than problems.
yeah.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you, Nikki. If we can turn to Jackie.
What was the question again? What have I done differently?
Through the program, what changed for you in terms of how well you listened, and what was the consequence of you doing that in work, of trying it out in work?
Um, so I think for me it was an awareness. It's the same thing that you're not always aware that you've drifted off or that you've gone into your fix it mode because a lot of the time people come to you with symptoms rather than the root cause of something that's not right. And I work with lots of different people as well, so there could be multiple things going on at one time. So I think one time when I was really, really aware of it, it might be in the start of the program, and one HR colleague came to me and said, "Oh, you're doing a coaching course. I need you to. Could you help me with this particular issue?" And I listened to what she was saying rather than just saying, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I can do that. What is it?" I listened to what she was saying, and actually, as we carried on with the conversation, it turned out it wasn't coaching that this individual needed, it was something else. But rather than me saying, no, 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 that's not coaching, you need to do X, Y, and Z, I asked a few questions of her till eventually, during that conversation, she stopped and sort of had a light bulb moment and said, actually, I suppose it's not coaching that this person needs, it's something else, isn't it? I said, yes. And I thought that was the difference. For me, it was rather me telling somebody what I thought should happen. They came to that conclusion themselves, and that was because I listened to what she was saying, and then asked appropriate questions rather than just diving in and trying to fix everything. And
Yeah,
I think the two benefits of that, I mean, one of those benefits is if she ever comes across that situation again, then she'd have those tools and skills to deal with it and she'd recollect that. And it's a little bit of confidence as well because she's worked that out herself rather than relying on somebody else. So.
yeah. I think that's a really, really powerful story, isn't it? Such a great example of, a real life situation where you've helped improve somebody's own confidence, but also they've owned that solution. They haven't been told, they've come to it in their own time. And as you say, it's something that's going to stick for them in future now because they know that answer. They found that answer themselves. Thank you, Jackie. And if we can turn to Mike, maybe with the same question.
Yeah, I suppose picking up what previously was picked up. I think sometimes I always feel that I want to help people, and that's obviously part and parcel of the gig that you're doing, all part and parcel of being just a human being. I think the challenge often comes from obviously the instruction straight to just telling people what to do and just remembering the kind of the curve of the coaching curve as it were. I think sometimes I've always you can always listen, and you sometimes again it's jotting down enough information that you can to go, well, actually what actually was where we're going with this, because is this just a I want to listen to what you've got to say without an output. And I think the bit for me that's changing was to try and get to what does it look like at the end, with what helps them get to what they look like at the end, rather than just saying, well, we've chatted for an hour and I don't really understand what not necessarily what the purpose is. Maybe it was either my lack of understanding or my lack of questioning skills in regards to what it is. Because is this a venting session, or is this actually, generally I've got a problem? And I think equally, what probably I'm working through a little bit is if you are going to go back to somebody and say, what do you think, that it's done in the right sort of tone and mannerism, because again, it doesn't want to come across that you're not there to help and support, but i.e., often if this was done, it's better as a conversation rather than an email, for example. So freeing the time up to go and have a conversation around with somebody to have a good understanding of going, what does it look like at the end product? But equally, if I come back to you and say, yeah, but what do you think? And that pause around it, because often there'd be a little bit of somebody saying, I don't know. And then for us to basically go through, what's your best guess? Everybody could, in theory, come up with a guess. Everybody could, in theory, have that, the epiphany moment or having a little think about it. It's that continuous into, even when somebody says, I generally don't know, it's our skills that we're working on to basically say, have a guess. What's the worst that you could say, suggest, and that you can come up with. And I generally think most people could come up with a guess, and we could work from that as a possible solution. So, yeah, I'll say that was me.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mike. I think that's really interesting, isn't it? And what I kind of heard in there is that almost like how we define help to start with, and how often we come from a point of saying, well, help is that I've got to provide you with the answer and I've got to dive in and I've got to fix it for you. When actually help is a lot broader than that. And it's, helping somebody find their own solution, or it could be say, well, is helping for you today that opportunity to vent? And maybe you don't want a solution for me. Maybe you don't want me to fix it, but also helping them come from whatever starting point they want to come from, and even if that's an imperfect solution that they're coming up with, that's great, and we can work with that. So I really loved how you've broadened that kind of definition of help, and it's something that you're curious about at the beginning of the conversation. I think that's really, really powerful. Thank you. And finally, Lois, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what these guys have said is that, I can totally relate to a lot of what they're saying, but expanding on that. So when I was talking a little bit earlier, and Mike picked it up straight away, where we were talking about the repetition. Quite often, if you don't listen and you don't allow them to really say what it is they're saying, they're just going to keep coming back with the same problem because you're not helping them. You're giving them the answers, but not helping them find the answers themselves. And
Mm,
sometimes by doing that, you're not actually solving it. You're just postponing it until the next time, until the next time. And might pick that up about the training, because that's something that I looked at then, was why am I constantly getting asked these questions all the time? And I kind of sat back and said, hang on a minute. So we sat down and we actually discussed and said, this is the process, this is how it works, and this is why it works this way. We had this discussion, and there was a complete lack of understanding really as to why things work the way they worked, because even though in my head you've given them all the instructions, you've given them the training, you haven't fundamentally explained it and allowed them to say, well, why? You haven't answered the whys. And so once I'd done that, what I then found was that my managers were then able to impart that further down the team. And now I don't get asked those questions. And it was a case of actually just jumping in and trying to solve it, didn't solve anything, it just postponed it. But allowing the managers to take on board the information that I'd given them, to think about that and impart that to their own staff. They did it their own way, and now I don't get asked that. And I think sometimes when you are in the thick of it, you don't recognize the patterns. You don't see that there is a pattern there because you're right in the thick of it. People are asking you questions. Our action is to solve it. Our action is to fix it. So that's what we do. And we don't step back and we don't think about it. We don't listen to what we're actually being asked. We just, and how many other people have asked us that same thing. We're just solving it. Whereas for this, I stepped back and thought, well, hang on a minute, this is not the first time I've heard this. And what is the fundamental issue here? As Nikki said, there's an underlying issue that has nothing to do. It feeds into why I'm being asked it, but ultimately, as Mike said, we're getting the symptoms, not the actual problem. And when I stepped back and actually thought about what it was that I was actually being asked, the pattern is really clear and it's obvious. And it's like, okay, well, how do I solve this? Well, actually, I don't solve it. I just give them the knowledge they need to solve it. And yeah, and that's how it works. So
yeah, I love that. That kind of really kind of deep listening and curiosity, as you say, kind of like going under the surface, under the skin of it, and being curious about, okay, why am I still being asked this? Why does this keep coming back? And a good deal of reflection as well, which we haven't really touched on so far, but that reflecting on the issues that were coming up, and giving yourself space to do that. I mean, that's what I heard in that, and it's so powerful. Thank you, Lois, for sharing it. I think you're right. We often are so much in the thick of it, aren't we, that we don't take that opportunity to kind of step back.
and I think that's one of the things of listening, is it is stepping back, and it is actually, yes, they're asking me this, but what are they really asking me? Yes, they were asking me how
Mm,
to do da 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 da, but what they're really asking me is, can you train me on da 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 da, because I don't know how to do this. And it's that there's a subtle difference between those questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think I picked up on two threads there that you were all talking about in different ways. And that comes back to what Mike emphasized and Nikki emphasized in particular, but linked to what Lois just said about differentiating as a leader, about when it's appropriate to fix or not. And that need to kind of really think about what it is that somebody's asking you. And then yeah, where it is helpful to come in with an answer because there's a knowledge gap or there's something that you need to pass on, and you have that knowledge and they don't. But when it's about their role and the responsibilities within their role, is it the best thing to give them the answer when it supports their thinking? So then it links back to the two of you were talking about asking that one more question to kind of get under the surface before you went in and fixed, because it encouraged thinking in others. And the consequence of that, I think, is really powerful because you've talked, I think a few of you talked about confidence, but also somebody talked about ownership, and it's their role and that's being their responsibilities. So how you empower them to do their role, that for me was really, really powerful. So the way in which you're prompting people to think in that role. And I love the repetition, that kind of noticing the patterns. I think that's a really powerful thing to pick up and notice. Can we move on then to ask one question of all of you, and that is for those people who are listening, if you could give one piece of advice to those leaders who wants to listen better or move away from fixing at work, what would that advice be? And could I ask Mike first, please?
I've got three. Can I do all three?
You can do all three, Mike.
Okay. Mine is sit on your hands. If you talk a lot with your hands, if you need to articulate a lot more with your hands, if you either physically or psychologically sit on them, you might calm yourself and quieten yourself down a little bit more because you're not in so much motion. The other one then sort of interlinks a little bit with that one and count to 10. So in an ever sort of evolving world that's always noisy and busy, the skill of being able to count to 10 in your head without that intent to reply is a skill. You know, create the quiet in your own environment, but allow people to understand why, that you're reflecting on the question. And even if you sort of said, you know what, I need more time to think about it, just, you know, keep that sort of momentum going in regards to the quietness. And I think the epiphany moment for me is to move. And then what I mean by that is sometimes when you're in your own kind of space, if you're in your own office, if you're in your own office at home or desk at work or anything, or you're in your own environment, you're in the same. So it's the same routine, it's the same space, it's the same walk, it's the same pattern. And sometimes what you need is that ability to rethink, reevaluate, and come up with some different ideas. And in order to do that, I think you need to create a different walk, a different space, and a different opportunity to allow yourself to think differently. Because if you're in a routine, you know, everybody often says that analogy of, you know, you get what you get, you know, it's that, well, we've always done it this way. Well, allow yourself to think to yourself, well, if I take a different route, I might think differently because there's not the pattern now. And it'll allow me to think, well, let's do something different. I mean, I'm sat somewhere different now to where I would normally be. But my epiphany moment came from doing a different route. So, you know, the route to the journey to the vision, the mission of what the problem is, well, actually take a different route. Be curious, be different. Yeah.
I love that, Mike. I suppose what I was hearing in two of the three tips that you shared was about slowing down and calm, you know, creating that sense of calm, which is really, really nice reflection. I'll be interested to see whether others came out with that as well. So can we go to Jackie next?
Yep. I've got a simple practical one that works for me, and I think give yourself time either side of meetings if you can do that. Sometimes adult conversations that's not possible. So rather than starting a meeting at 10, start the meeting at 9:55, or then you've got a little bit more time maybe to think, and people not so rush. People usually start at 10, so it's giving yourself a little bit of time to prepare beforehand, get into a different headspace, and actually putting that time in your diary as well. If your meetings, start 5 minutes early thinking about it. The other thing is finish a meeting instead of finishing at 10:30, going on to your next one, finish a meeting at 10:25, allowing yourself that time to reflect then on that conversation as well, because you're just giving yourself a little bit of space at either end to think before and think afterwards. And those things help clear your mind before you go into your next set of meetings or your next conversations. So I've found that really, really a practical and useful way to finish. And if someone's setting up a meeting, I wouldn't just go from one meeting to another. I say, give me 5 minutes, give me 10 minutes so I can come out of that meeting, clear my mind, think about what I'm going to do, and actually listen when you're giving yourself space to listen when you go into the next one. So I think you've got to be clear about what's right for you, and that really is about looking after yourself and looking after you, so that you can look after others and add value and support others. So that would be my
I
top
love
tip.
that, Jackie. Yeah. And it kind of links to Mike's point, doesn't it, about creating space
Yeah.
and slowing down, and that rushing. But it's interesting about putting yourself into that mindset or into that headspace where you are in a position to listen, so that you're in the best possible position to listen.
I think sometimes, 5 minutes is nothing, but sometimes you feel under pressure, and especially if you're new to a business or you're new in role, you feel under pressure to perform and to be there and to be really, really eager. But actually, the more grown-up thing to do is say, can you just give me 5 minutes before we start the meeting so I can prepare myself and prepare, my thoughts and be present and give you 100%. So maybe that's with
Lovely.
confidence as well. You start being like that.
Yeah, yeah. And that is a professional skill,
Yeah.
as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lois, can we come to you next?
Yeah, so what I found is that, first of all, let them finish the question, let them, and actually listen to what it is. And then what I found is that saying back to them, or repeating back that question, or repeating back to them, this is what I heard, or this is what is this what you're asking me? And then repeating that back, because then they feel that, first of all, they've been listened to. And secondly, I've then actually taken on board actually what it is they're asking me and not just assumed what they're asking me. And I found that works really well. And I think it's a lot what these guys are saying. It's just that extra minute just to stop, listen, process, and then decide what your next course of action is. And yeah, and basically repeat it back and then you can decide, is the next thing me telling them, or is the next thing actually asking them a question? So the next thing I'm going to say is not an instruction or a way of doing it. My next thing is, well, what do you feel? What do you think you should do here, or what do you think? So my next thing is to ask them a question. So really think about you're listening to process rather than listening just to give an answer. And I think that's something that all leaders can do, even when we're stressed, even when we're in the thick of it, even when you've got a million things and people come over and they ask you a question. I think that's just generally, if you stop, repeat that question back so you know what it is they're actually asking you. And yeah, and just to echo what Mike said about changing the environment, stepping outside. So when it is a longer session or whatever, change that environment, especially for me as a business owner. There's a certain hierarchy there. By taking that conversation out of the work environment, going somewhere else, sitting in a coffee shop, sitting somewhere else, we take away that hierarchy, and therefore it opens it up to much more open conversation.
Motion detected at the front door.
Lois, I think what I was really hearing there is the kind of the processing time. So the benefit of taking that space, as Jackie was saying, it's time to think and get your head in the mindset, but you were talking about it shows that you're listening to the person, but it also gives you time to think and then evaluate what the next course of action. And I think we talk in the program about listening to understand rather than listening to speak. And I think that point really demonstrates that really well, that actually taking that time helps you to understand what is it that's being asked, and then puts that back onto the others. And the environment point we can come to in a minute. But let's go to Nikki next. What would you say for your top tip for a leader?
So totally agree with what everybody else has said. And I think something I learned on the program was about listening, to just listen and being present and in the moment, and not in your head, and not sort of half listening, but half thinking, what am I going to ask next? Or what we're having for tea later, or whatever. You can get distracted by all kinds of thoughts. But I think what I found at the beginning when we first started practicing coaching was I would be only half listening because I'd be panicking internally that I don't know what I'm going to say next. There's going to be a massive period of silence where I'm waiting for a question to pop into my head. And so you're thinking of that question, so you're ready to ask it when actually you've cut off listening to half of what they've said, and your question might not really even be relevant by the time they've finished speaking. So I think that's what I really learned, is just to trust myself, and that the right questions or the right things to say will come at the time when I need them. So you're fine to just be in the moment, just be present, listening to that person, and then whatever you need to then ask or say will naturally come, and that's benefited me in many ways, actually, I must say, not just sort of in trying to practice coaching, but in lots of other ways. I've found that knowledge really helpful.
I love that. About trusting yourself that it will come. Yeah, because then you are listening to understand rather than speak. And you're focused on the understanding that about the other person. You're trying to understand the person you're speaking to. Yeah, love that, Nikki. And being in the moment, I think, coming back to that moment and where that moment takes place. And a few of you've talked about the environment, so kind of looking at where it is best to have that moment, but being present when it's happening. Some really nice connections there.
Yeah. It's really powerful, isn't it? That whole kind of slowing down. And I could really imagine you, Nikki, in that first conversation, in that coaching conversation, panicking, what am I going to say? There's going to be this big silence. And I think that everybody can kind of identify with that and translate it into a work situation where they're faced with somebody who's, explaining a problem or a solution. You're like, oh my goodness, well, what can we do about this? And you've not even finished listening to what the issue is, and perhaps falling into what Lois was saying about making an assumption about what this is about and formulating your response before even the other person has had a chance to finish. So I think that's just I think you all had very powerful reflections there and insights that you shared. So thank you very much. So thank you to all of you today. And now we'd love to hear from those of you who are listening in. Is there something that you've heard today that you would like to explore further, or maybe you've got a question for one of our panelists? So do unmute yourselves now and ask a question, or pop a question in the chat, and we will continue the conversation that way. So has anybody got any questions?
I would just like to say thank you, because I know I'm a fixer and know I like to fix people. I feel like my door is always open and it's always got a queue. But I'm quite overwhelmed sometimes by how much I'm trying to fix people and how I can't support everyone. And actually, there's a lot that they can do themselves. So actually, you sometimes think that you're on your own in this situation. And so I just wanted to say thank you, because actually it's been really useful listening to all your stories. And I've written down at least 15 different points. Andrea knows I'm a very over reflector, and that'll give me something to go away and think about. And yeah, it's definitely something I need to work on. So having not done those programs, that's maybe something for me. The dogs are going mental outside, so I might have to just shut up in a second. But I just wanted to say thank you, because I think hopefully from what you've said today, I can take something on board from that.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
And the dogs are
Thank
going
you.
mental, so I'm just going to go shut them up. So thank you
Keeping
very
it
much.
real, it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping it real. Keeping it real. Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or any questions for our panelists? Or do the panelists have any questions for each other? And we've opened the floor up to everybody.
I think I've got one thing to say, is that this is a continuous journey as well. It's not linear, and you have good days and bad days. So some days you might do brilliant at listening. Other days, like say I've got awful headache. I've probably not been on my top game today. But it's just being aware of that, and you think, well, we're all humans, and nobody's perfect. But it's just an awareness that this is, like I say, it's a journey. You're not going to be brilliant from day one, and maybe not a day 100, you might not be brilliant, but it doesn't matter, does it?
Absolutely. No, I think the phrase that was shared with me, which I think is a wonderful phrase, is that we are all students, and we are all students of life in general, aren't we? None of us are 100% perfect or done. We're all learning. Every day is a school day. And I think that's a lovely thing to share, Jackie, that you do have good days and you do have bad days, and there's often always something to learn in that.
And I think
I think, oh, go on, Lois.
I was just going to say, and also sometimes the people that you're talking to, where people have come to you and they're asking you questions, you have to remember that they too have good days and bad days, and sometimes what they're talking about or where it's coming from, you have to take that on board, that people's, that we all have good days and bad days. It's not just us, it's the other person at the other side as well.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
good point.
Absolutely. Nikki.
And even good
Yeah, it was
5
just
minutes and bad 5 minutes.
yeah. I was just really following on from Lois and Jackie that, it's as a leader, you can think of it as sort of a, a long-term, it's like the long-term game, really. That, you're not looking at short-term wins. You don't have to sit with somebody, every week for 4 weeks and do an hour coaching and think you've done it. As a leader, you're bringing in these techniques to your sort of day-to-day management, and you like we said, you sometimes situations won't fit a coaching style, and you do just need to fix, but you can see it as a sort of longer term piece that you're bringing in those techniques where they might be appropriate, and also reflecting where you could have done it and you didn't, or things didn't quite go as you hoped, or you didn't listen quite so well that time. But all the time you're moving forward, and the person will be developing and growing, and you will be seeing positive things happening. It doesn't have to be a quick overnight fix.
And that's a really good point there, Nikki, because that's kind of what I was talking about in the examples that I was giving. It was, these are short-term problems, and the gut reaction is to fix them, get them sorted. But actually, when I sat back and reflected on this, yes, there were short-term problems at that moment, but actually they opened up a much bigger issue, which then led on to much further conversations, which then my managers then went on and solved themselves. So which got rid of those short-term issues. So yeah, it is a lot of the techniques and everything that you do learn, you can put in the short term and also feed into longer term as well. Yeah.
No,
About
really,
being
good point.
resilient.
Yeah.
And it's about raising awareness, because like Nikki said, sometimes you don't actually have the time to coach them. You just got to say, do this, because you're up against time pressures or something else. But it's recognizing when you've done that, and when you are coaching, or when you're mentoring somebody, and it's recognizing those differences. That it's just raising awareness, I guess, of your skills and the tools in your pencil case, if anybody knows what they are still nowadays. But
Yeah, I think, and also the
your
sort of
iPad, whatever.
and the kind of assets that your team members are, really. You've got these people in your team for a reason. It's because they are good at what they do, or hopefully they are. So, it's about kind of maximizing that to your benefit, like you do any other resource in a business, trying to get the absolute best out of them. But the beauty of doing it this way is they see such a benefit as well from it. It benefits both.
Thank you. No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, some really, really powerful reflections there. So over to Helen, I think.
Well, I think the last thing to say is thank you so much to our panelists today. So thank you to Lois, to Nikki, to Mike and Jackie. I think for being so open and giving up your time to talk to us today as well. What you've shared for us is exactly the kind of honest and practical insights that make these conversations so valuable. And thank you to all of those who've joined today, whether you're listening at home or you've joined us in person today. If you'd like to find out more about the Year 2 programmes, we have got some spaces left on these programmes. They're all fully funded if you're an employer in York or North Yorkshire and you've got more than one employee. So head to www.conversationsforchange.co.uk and registration is open now. And finally, if it's okay with those people in the room, we're going to put into the chat just a quick poll on how useful you found today's conversation, just so we can evaluate how well you've found it. And also we're asking you to tell us one thing that you're taking away from today's session. So I'll invite everybody to put the response to that in the chat, if that's okay. So first of all, evaluating how useful the conversation was on a scale of 1 to 5, and then what are you taking away from today's session? If you can put your response in the chat, or indeed speak it out loud, if you prefer to do that. But thank you very much once again. I really appreciate your time that you've given up for today's conversation. I think hearing from you who've been through the programme is so much more powerful than it can be from us or any evaluation report. So a massive thank you to our leaders from our graduating cohorts.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what have we got in the chat coming through? Taking away that you don't have to solve it, you just need the impact of to impart the knowledge into them and to resolve it without me. I love that. Really taking on board that kind of, it's about facilitating somebody else to think, and then stopping and taking time to reflect and pause before responding. Yeah, that importance of taking that time out. And being present. I like that, Jane. Yeah, thank you. My mind goes off into the solution and fixing it, and this affects listening. So that's really good to notice the impact of on listening of being distracted by what comes into your mind rather than being present and listening to what they've said. So some lovely reflections. Thank you.
No, that's fine. I was just saying, while we're just waiting, if anybody else wants to add anything, do remember that our next Lunch and Learn is on the 4th of September, and we will be focusing on how your internal state shapes your leadership conversations. And we're going to be joined in that conversation with some other fantastic leaders. We've got Helen Jones, the head of Visitor Services at Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, Molly Brannan, who's a communications exec at Hey Me, Julia Beebe, who's lead consultant at Grounded HR, and also Tony Crew, who's a team manager at Old Rock Manor. So we're really looking forward to that conversation, and he's here today. So hi, Tony. Really excited to have that conversation. We touched on that in today's discussion about how you affect the conversation, and we will be going into that in a lot more detail next time. So do come to that one too.
Super. So we'll stop the recording.